they cleared the stage, which means I'm either going to start off breakdancing, or maybe that was just part of something they didn't tell me about. But what a panel. Thank you again. I thought that was a really interesting perspective from a few different lenses. I wanted to thank the conference organizers for inviting me here today, and just provide a little bit of background about myself, as well as the organization I work for, and then just some lenses into some of the things that I've noticed over the last 20 or so years being part of the industry, but more specifically involved with the digital aspects of pharmaceuticals since the early beginnings of my career. So I'm part of the executive team at Within3. We're a 10-year-old software company. We specialize in life sciences collaborations. We'll touch a little upon what we do and how it's relevant to some of the conversations we've been having today. But I thought it was interesting, right? A lot of the themes and items that come up as quote-unquote hurdles or opportunities for the industry to tackle as a whole have been around for years. So I remember one of my first experiences with digital and pharmaceutical companies was around 1998 when I was building websites for a major pharmaceutical company. And there was a debate at the time in MLR around would physicians even use the internet? I think we answered that. There's continued debate around how patients will use the internet, where would they use it, why would they use it? And if as an industry we're going to be able to respond to them, how can we do so, right? In view of our regulatory parameters, in view of compliance, in view or even relative to where this is happening in the world, because there are nuances in regional markets that will affect the way that you need to be able to deploy solutions to support those efforts. And so nowadays, when you look at them, they're exemplified, right? Because you have organic content being developed through social channels and social, technologies that you're going to need to be cognizant of if you're a player in this space or if you're a pharmaceutical manufacturer. And so it's interesting. We've increased exponentially the inputs and outputs that contribute to the communication model between the industry and, let's say, external customers. But I think there are opportunities still there to optimize the technologies that we utilize, to help increase, productivity and value across the board. One thing is for sure, though, change is the only constant, right? So it's an old quote and maybe a little even hackneyed, but I think it's still relevant because even as many of the people in the room have been part of these digital conferences over the years, every time we talk about things, even the rules that we pivot, we might go stronger to the left or stronger to the right, begin to change. They begin to change based on patient or even healthcare professional preference. They begin to change based on policy, whether that be corporate or even legislative. And so if we're cognizant of that, the solutions that we try to deploy are going to change as well. So I think it's just a good thing for us to remind ourselves as we think about different solutions and different ways of engaging key customer segments across the board, is that you're going to need to kind of change, right? You're going to need to change internally, right? So change management, right? The idea of changing process in a large pharmaceutical company is daunting. The reasons for that are logical, right? They're ingrained, they're SOP'd for a reason. They adhere to a specific set of policies, but as the world changes, we need to make sure that we are too as an industry. So venues will change, formats will change, engagement styles will change, and the way that you measure those things certainly is going to need to change. And so, if bearing this in mind, with change as a constant, let's take a look at one lens into the venue, which has to do more with collaboration. That's an area that our company, is playing in. And so I want to kind of use change as a constant as it appeals to, or as it is relevant to engaging different key customer segments across the product lifecycle. So when we think about change in discussion venues, live meetings have been the mainstay of the pharma industry for 50, 60, 70 years now. With the advent of even telephones and webcasts and things like that, the idea of shortening the time frame to plan one of these or kind of deploy them, let's say through a 3-hour window on a Thursday night is appealing. Those can be great, they can be fantastic. But with social technologies, it also provides the opportunity to look at things, say, over a period of time, right? So can we engage patients, payers, healthcare professionals, caregivers, in a way that, let's say, is not a live meeting or it's not a live broadcast meeting, but it behaves very much in a way like social media, like the way that we do with our personal relationships or with our professional relationships. Since I've landed on the ground in Croatia, I've been checking Facebook, I've been doing my LinkedIn, I've been using the pervasive social technologies that help me manage multiple relationships in my personal life and my professional life. Why should it be any different in communications between an industry and key customer segments? And so with overtime venues like the one we offer, they can be customized to each organization because each organization is going to need to adapt them differently depending on whether they're talking with payers or patients or healthcare professionals, whether they're talking to those folks in the clinical stage, in the commercial stage, whether they're talking to those folks on a national scale, on an international scale, or on a regional scale, because all those variables will affect certainly the way that you deploy solutions and ultimately what you're able to do with them. So again, this is not a foreign idea, right? So if anybody's either taken an online course, been part of a Yahoo Groups discussion, part of a Reddit, or discussion thread, posted anything on Facebook, LinkedIn, I imagine everybody in the room at some point in time has been exposed to this idea. The way we see the industry embracing and adopting it is to be able to utilize it to run things like virtual advisory boards, ongoing steering committees, the creation of clinical content around clinical trials, the validation of messaging when it comes to marketing or programming, the engagement of different customer segments, from the cradle of a product to the grave of a product around different items and things that you'll do. They're doing these things intermittently. They're doing them in one-off fashion. They're doing them in constant fashion in terms of, hey, we've got a standing group of people that we're going to talk to once a month for the next 12 months. And what's really interesting about it is while it may seem as, hey, this is a good other way for us to engage folks, the format lends itself to very deep, rich engagement. There's a few reasons for that. Certainly you eliminate time, okay? In a live meeting, oftentimes the person's voice that gets heard the most is either the loudest one or the most extroverted one. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the right one, right? And so when you flatten the playing field and you allow people, maybe a little bit more introverted, to digest the information and then articulate themselves in the written word, what we're hearing from clients is, wow, the level of detail that these folks are getting into in this format is far superior to what we could accomplish in a live discussion or even through a webcast to some. So this can become a surrogate way or even adjunct way for you to engage different key customer segments. Getting to that gem, right? Getting to that nugget of information that you spend millions of dollars on and hours of time on in terms of iteration and all that kind of stuff is ultimately in many cases the goal. And so in most cases this can be a viable way to arrive at those insights. Oh, rather than having me chat the whole time, we put in a 90-second video just to kind of contextualize what I'm talking about in terms of our offering, and then we'll just move on to some use cases from the industry.
Make key decisions. For life science companies, this means routinely engaging physicians, patients, and payers across the entire product lifecycle. Organizations engage stakeholders in investigator meetings, steering committees, publication strategy, advisory boards, panels, one-on-one interviews, and more. But running these programs can be costly, time-consuming, and often ineffective. Introducing a better way, the Within3 Communication Center. The Within3 Communication Center is a compliant online discussion platform built for life science enterprises and their most important customers. It allows companies to gain insights and engage in two-way dialogue with both internal and external stakeholders. Different than live or webcast meetings, which require everyone to be available at the exact same time, participants engage whenever it's most convenient for them in working sessions over days, weeks, or months. R&D, medical affairs, and commercial teams are engaging patients, payers, and physicians to gain insight through virtual advisory boards with full moderator control. Strategize on new data sets.
Well, half of it'll do, that's fine. So I think with respect to the things that were captured in the video, I was articulating some of those things. It's a discussion platform, right? It allows you to engage different key customer segments. And the goal here ultimately is to use a tool set like this so that you can engage different groups when it's convenient for them, and they can access these environments through their laptops, through their desktops, through their phones, and those different types of things, so that they can ultimately provide you information, whether it be a paid set of advisors, whether it be working with a patient advocacy group and tapping into their different patient advocates. All those things can certainly be accomplished. There's a change in the benefit, in the value and the benefit, right? And so when you eliminate time constraints, you can potentially accomplish more. When you open up the floor to everybody, whether it's 15 advisors, whether it's 50 patients, or whether it's 500 speakers, or whether it's 10,000 members of the same association or same, specialty, you're almost encouraging a more well-rounded conversation through full participation. If anybody's ever run an ad board in their life, oftentimes you'll send out pre-reads. The hope is everybody's going to read it. We live in a compliance-driven industry, and so the idea of having your greater ability to make sure that they did get these files, did open these files, did look through the PowerPoints and the movies and things like that is really important. Thinking before your speech or being able to acknowledge what other people have said is really important. You see this a lot, especially in international markets. Some cultures, when they do ad boards or clinical events, there's a bit more of a hierarchy, and so there's less kind of back and forth and discussion around things. This tends to kind of level the playing field here and allow you to incorporate others' views. And you're not doing this in a vacuum, right? The whole idea here is to have a greater collaborative effort between the industry and the different customer segments. In fact, relative to the panel that was up here before this, certainly over the last 5 to 6 years, I've seen a lot more engagement directly with patients, a lot more with the pharmaceutical companies being the ones that want to initiate that. Oftentimes, they might be doing it as part of patient advisors or through partnerships with their advocacy groups. So that's certainly a trend, and hopefully that continues. So again, a change in the assessment of the value of these things in terms of, not one solution fits all, and certainly maybe online discussions may not either. Most companies now looking to the right mix of these different types of programs to ensure that they're going to engage different customer segments through different types of tactics and solutions. Ultimately, the right mix is going to yield the right end result and ideally play into the full communication strategy. So again, there's a number of different ways to think about programming, and this is just a handful of them. One of the things I wanted to talk to, because it was mentioned before, especially in the last panel, is multiple stakeholders, right? No longer can you just go out to the generalists and the specialists. You need to go to different HCP segments, whether that be generalist specialists, but then it's also ancillary and primary. You may need to talk to your patients. In many cases, it might be their caregivers as well. You may be also needing to engage with different payers and stakeholders in the reimbursement game. So it's important to have, a viable capability to engage different customer segments at different point in time within your organization. And it's important to have the correct level of functionality in there. So it's not just about asking a question and letting people open up a dialogue on it. It's maybe you're collecting data and you want to ask questions around very pointed things. Maybe you're working on documents, and so you need to have a documentum type of solution built in there. Maybe you're working across different time zones and international languages, so you need to have a translation capability built in there. Or maybe you need to cater to the 85% or so physicians in the United States that don't like to type. They like to articulate their thoughts through dragon dictation, so you may need to account for even those small different types of things that exist in different marketplaces. So, pretty busy slide now that I look on a bigger screen, but to give you a sense of where organizations are adopting these types of capabilities to underpin initiatives from let's say the early stage in clinical R&D, lot in protocol development, developing the next arm of their study, inclusion criteria, those different types of things being discussed earlier. We're seeing as early as phase 2 now, and encouragingly enough, if that's a word, patients are being invited into that conversation. Payers certainly are invited into those conversations. So you're seeing a lot more engagement with different key customer groups earlier early in the chain. Medical affairs is probably the biggest area, just because we see so many organizations that are very interested in making sure that their medical platform and their strategy is very, very tight going into launch, and then they're refining it as they go along. Publication planning, which is long been a very, very arduous and time-consuming initiative, is another area where we're seeing greater efficiencies come through a greater level of connectivity with different, with your different writers and with your different authors. So it's important, right? Everybody here is talking about time, speed, agility, your ability to be reflective or reflexive to the industry. And so, having these types of programs in place can help you do that. So I just wanted to give a couple of examples. I think I've got about 5 minutes left here. One example is using it internally, right? So you got MSLs around the country, you got sales forces around the world, you got different regions and teams. There's a lot of, folks that are out in the field and they don't feel very connected back to the home base. It's been a challenge for the industry as a whole, maybe to try and collect those thoughts and to get feedback. What this particular group learned is that MSLs were really worried about the future of their career within this particular organization, within this particular therapeutic area, and they had they didn't feel like they had strong enough training on one-to-one interaction with their, with their customer segments, with their KOLs in their region. And so they changed the curriculum, right? They got some inputs from people. They did this multiple times over the course of the year, and they had a forum really for their MSLs across these different regions to be able to communicate in. And it did open up a greater level of organic content development, not your traditional journal club, but one that was actually authored by the MSLs themselves, right? Where they could share best practices, they can exchange better ideas and talk about the things that they see in the field on a regular basis. Insights and engagement. This one, to me, is almost mind-blowing, right? Imagine you're a country manager and you're seeing your product not get written as many as the regions around you. And that's because your particular region has a diagnostic test that was leading to false positives. So cases were getting by and not being diagnosed because of something that was happening in a product outside of their own. They were only able to discover this through a series of regional advisory boards within that particular country, and then create the materials necessary to address that. Data evidence. Again, this is probably even more important, very, very important in the U.S., right? So it's no longer the data, right, that the product is going to be effective. The product is going to be as safe or it can be delivered in a different way to its, that's going to have a third party insurer elevate that product to the top of its formulary. There needs to be a pharmacoeconomic benefit as well. And so this organization was finding out that even if they produced a better, faster product to deliver, a greater result to the client or a greater result to the customer, it was not necessarily going to achieve what they hoped it would achieve from a formulary status. So they had to actually build in an additional arm to kind of prove the pharmacoeconomic benefit, so they'd be able to have the empirical data there that they could speak with their payers and their customers. And then lastly, they were hoping to improve and tighten the timeframes around publications, right? So the idea of using something that was very much like a checkout, check-in library has been around for a while, and it's fraught with a series of challenges. When you can ask people to come in and say, okay, over the course of the next week, we're all going to look at this document together. You're going to be able to mark it up basically in Google Sheets format. Be able to collect information from different authors and support those authors through the process. You can accelerate the way that which you create a publication. So anytime you can shorten the time frame to content creation while staying within the framework of what the organizations do from the SOP perspective, that's always an excellent result. These authors were very excited about this. They came out of it engaged, and the client was very, very happy with the results. So these are kind of very broad numbers. What we see is, we've worked with about 50 different pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies to date. Years ago, I would say, hey, the idea of doing an environment where people can actually, write in their own answers would give a lot of people the chills if they ever had to get in front of their own MLR teams. But the data has proven itself, right? Physicians will come here, healthcare professionals, patients, payers, we've seen pretty much every audience across the board will come here, they will engage here. The format lends itself to pretty deep, rich engagement across the board. They're interested in discussing and engaging directly with the industry as a whole. So hopefully I've given you a sense of the different types of programs you can think about when you think about these online discussion forums. If there are any questions around kind of, the experiences that we have or what we do have a booth here as well. And with that, I'll wrap my time with, I think, 19 seconds.